My wife got a promotion. She took the whole team to dinner, including her assistant, but didn't invite me. She sent me a text. Remember to eat the leftovers in the fridge. I replied, okay. Then calmly I changed the locks. Late at night she came back drunk with him. The key didn't turn, and what they saw through the window left them completely stunned. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Henry and I'm 58 years old. After 32 years in the same accounting firm, I thought I understood how celebrations worked in a marriage. When your spouse achieves something significant, you celebrate together. That's what I believed until last Tuesday when Stella got her promotion to regional director. I was washing dishes after dinner when she walked into the kitchen, her phone buzzing with congratulatory messages. Her face glowed with satisfaction as she scrolled through text after text. This calls for a celebration, I said, drying my hands on the kitchen towel. Should we open that bottle of wine we've been saving, or maybe go to Romano's? Stella looked up from her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't excitement or joy. It was something colder, more calculated. Oh, the team is already planning something, she said, her tone casual but distant. Marcus suggested this new place downtown. You know, the one with the rooftop bar? Marcus, her 28-year-old assistant who had joined the company 6 months ago. The same Marcus who somehow managed to insert himself into every conversation about work, every late meeting, every weekend conference call. I felt my stomach tighten. That sounds nice. What time should I be ready? Stella's fingers paused over her phone screen. She didn't look up when she answered. Actually, it's just going to be the team tonight. You understand, right? Work people, work talk. You'd probably be bored. The words hit me like cold water. I stood there holding the dish towel, watching my wife of 15 years dismiss me from her moment of triumph as if I were a stranger who had wandered into her kitchen. But it's your promotion, I said quietly. I want to celebrate with you. She finally looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my chest ache. Impatience. Annoyance. As if I were a child asking to join the adults' table. Henry, don't be dramatic. It's just one dinner. We can celebrate this weekend if you want. If I want. As if celebrating her success was some personal favor I was requesting rather than what a husband should naturally do. I watched her walk out of the kitchen, already dialing someone. Through the thin walls of our ranch house, I heard her voice change completely. Marcus, yes, I can't wait either. 7:30 works perfectly. The warmth in her voice when she spoke to him was something I hadn't heard directed at me in months, maybe longer. I finished the dishes in silence, each plate and glass feeling heavier than the last. By 6:15 I could hear her in the bedroom, drawers opening and closing, the hairdryer running. She was getting ready with the kind of care she used to reserve for our anniversary dinners. When she emerged an hour later, I barely recognized her. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year, the one she'd claimed was too fancy for anywhere we'd go. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless. She looked beautiful, radiant even. She looked like she was going on a date. How do I look? She asked, adjusting her earrings in the hallway mirror. Beautiful, I said, and meant it. You look absolutely beautiful. For a moment something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it passed quickly. Don't wait up, she said, grabbing her purse. These work dinners can run late. You know how it is. I nodded, though I didn't know how it was. In 32 years of marriage to my first wife and 15 years with Stella, I'd never been excluded from a celebration this important. She kissed my cheek, a brief, perfunctory gesture that felt more like obligation than affection. Her perfume, the expensive kind she only wore on special occasions, lingered in the air after she left. I sat in our living room, surrounded by the quiet of our empty house. The television droned in the background, but I wasn't watching. I was thinking about how excited I'd been when Stella first mentioned the possibility of this promotion. How proud I'd felt, how I'd planned to take her to dinner at the nice steakhouse across town, maybe buy her flowers, tell everyone we met that my wife had just been promoted to regional director. Instead, I was sitting alone while she celebrated with her team. At 8:30, my phone buzzed, a text from Stella. Remember to eat the leftovers in the fridge. Don't want them to go bad. I stared at the message for a long time. Not having a great time, wish you were here. Not love you, see you soon. Just a reminder about the leftovers, as if I were a house sitter she'd hired to watch the place. I typed back, okay. The single word felt inadequate, but what else was there to say? That I felt dismissed? That I felt like a stranger in my own marriage? That the woman I loved had just reduced me to someone who manages leftovers while she celebrates the biggest achievement of her career with another man? I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There, in a covered dish, was the leftover meatloaf from Sunday dinner. Cold, congealed, forgotten. Like me. I heated it in the microwave and ate standing at the counter, staring out the window at the driveway where Stella's car should have been. The meatloaf tasted like cardboard, but I finished every bite. As I washed my single plate and fork, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. A 58-year-old man eating reheated leftovers while his wife celebrated with her young assistant. When had I become someone whose presence was optional in his own life? The house felt different that night. Emptier somehow, though nothing had physically changed. I walked through rooms we'd shared for 5 years, rooms where we'd planned our future, argued about paint colors, made love on lazy Sunday mornings. Now they felt like spaces I was merely occupying. I went to bed at 10:30, something I'd never done when Stella was out. Usually I'd wait up, eager to hear about her day, to share in whatever had happened. But tonight the thought of lying awake listening for her car in the driveway felt pathetic. I was drifting off when I heard my phone buzz again, another text. Having such a great time. The team really knows how to celebrate. Marcus found this amazing wine. You would hate it. Too sophisticated. LOL. Even in her celebration she found a way to diminish me. To remind me that I didn't belong in her world of sophisticated wines and rooftop bars and young assistants who knew exactly what to say. I turned my phone face down and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there thinking about the last 6 months, about all the little changes I'd noticed but dismissed. The way Stella started working late more often, the way she'd light up when her phone buzzed with work messages, the way she'd started mentioning Marcus in casual conversation, always with a smile. And now this, the ultimate exclusion, on what should have been one of our happiest nights together. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew it was 3:15 in the morning and I was alone in bed. Stella still wasn't home. I woke up the next morning to an empty bed and the sound of running water. Stella was in the shower, and by the time I made my way to the kitchen she was already dressed for work, moving through her morning routine as if nothing had happened. "How was dinner?" I asked, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one our neighbor had given us last Christmas with "World's Best Husband" printed on the side. This morning it felt like mockery. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Good food. Good wine. You know how these work things are." No details, no excitement about her promotion, no mention of what time she'd gotten home or why she'd been out until after 3 in the morning celebrating a work dinner. She kissed my forehead on her way out, the same perfunctory gesture as the night before, and left me standing in the kitchen with my coffee and a growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. I took the day off work. I told myself it was to process Stella's promotion, maybe plan something special for the weekend. But really I needed time to think, time to understand why I felt so hollow after what should have been a happy occasion. Around noon I remembered the leftovers, the ones Stella had reminded me about. I opened the refrigerator and found not just the meatloaf but also a container of pasta salad and half a roasted chicken. Enough food for several days. Had she planned to be gone that long? I heated the pasta salad and ate it at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared breakfast that morning in polite, distant silence. As I chewed the cold pasta, I found myself staring at Stella's home office door. It was closed, as always. She'd claimed the spare bedroom as her workspace when we moved in together, and I'd respected that boundary, her private space for important work. But sitting there eating leftovers while she celebrated with Marcus, I felt something I'd never experienced in our marriage: suspicion. I finished lunch and found myself walking toward her office. The door wasn't locked. It never was during the day. Stella trusted me, or maybe she'd never imagined I'd have reason to look. Her desk was immaculate as always. Everything in its place, files organized, pens in a neat row. But as I stood there, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A small wooden box tucked behind her computer monitor. It was old, worn, the kind of thing you'd find at an antique shop. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew I was crossing a line, but the memory of last night, the dismissal, the exclusion, the way she'd looked at me like I was an inconvenience, pushed me forward. Inside the box were photographs. The first few were innocent enough: office Christmas party pictures, team-building events, the usual workplace memories. But as I flipped through them, my hands began to shake. There was Stella with Marcus at what looked like a company conference. She was laughing, her hand on his arm, leaning into him in a way that spoke of intimacy, not professional courtesy. Another photo showed them at what appeared to be a weekend retreat. They were hiking together, Stella wearing clothes I'd never seen before, looking radiant and carefree. But it was the last set of photos that made my legs weak. They were clearly taken during a weekend getaway. Stella and Marcus at a bed and breakfast I'd never heard of, sharing champagne on a porch swing. Marcus feeding her strawberries. Stella curled up against him on a couch, both of them laughing at some private joke. These weren't work photos, these were romantic photos, couple photos. My hands trembled as I set them down. How many weekend conferences had she mentioned in the past 6 months? How many late meetings? How many times had she claimed to be working when she was actually living a completely different life? I searched through the rest of the box with growing dread. There were ticket stubs from movies I'd never seen with her, restaurant receipts from places she'd never mentioned, a hotel keycard from a resort 3 hours away, dated just 2 weekends ago. The same weekend she'd claimed to be visiting her sister. At the bottom of the box was a small leather journal. I opened it with shaking hands. The entries were brief but devastating. March 15th. M surprised me with lunch at the little French place. Felt guilty lying to H about working through lunch, but M makes me feel so alive. April 2nd. Weekend at the lake house was perfect. M is everything I never knew I wanted. How do I tell H? May 20th. M says we should be more careful, but I can't help myself. When I'm with him, I remember who I used to be before settling for comfort. Settling for comfort. That's what our 15-year marriage was to her. Comfort. Not love, not partnership, not the life we'd built together. Just comfort. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. Promotion is official. M wants to celebrate properly this time. No more hiding in dark restaurants. Time to start living the life we deserve. H will understand eventually. He has to. I closed the journal and carefully placed everything back in the box exactly as I'd found it. My hands were steady now, my mind surprisingly clear. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something else. Not anger exactly. More like resignation. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand a truth you've been avoiding. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down with my coffee, now cold. The house around me looked the same, but everything had changed. The photos on the refrigerator, our vacation to Yellowstone 2 years ago, our wedding day 15 years past, now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I thought about all the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore. Stella's new enthusiasm for work, her sudden interest in weekend conferences, the way she'd started buying new clothes and getting her hair done more often, the gradual cooling of our physical relationship, which I'd attributed to stress and age. It hadn't been stress. It had been Marcus. I found myself thinking about the previous night differently now. It hadn't been a work celebration she'd excluded me from. It had been a celebration of their relationship, their future together. And she'd sent me a text about leftovers while she was probably planning to leave me. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been eating the literal leftovers in our refrigerator, I'd become the leftover in her life. The thing she didn't want to waste but didn't particularly want either. I spent the rest of the afternoon moving through our house like a stranger, seeing everything through new eyes. The bedroom we'd shared, where she'd been planning her escape. The living room where we'd watched television together while she dreamed of another man. The kitchen table where we'd discussed our days while she carefully edited out the most important parts of hers. When Stella came home at 6:30, I was making dinner. Pork chops, her favorite. She seemed surprised to find me cooking. "You didn't have to do this," she said, setting down her briefcase. "I could have grabbed something on the way home." "I wanted to," I said, and it was true. I wanted one more normal evening before everything changed, because now I knew it would change. It had to. "How was your day?" she asked, the question automatic, expected. "Quiet," I said, flipping the pork chops. I had time to think. Something in my tone made her look up from her phone. "Think about what?" I turned to face her, studying the woman I'd loved for 15 years. She was still beautiful, still the person I'd married, but she was also a stranger who kept photographs of another man in a hidden box and wrote about our marriage as if it were a prison sentence. "About us," I said. "About what we want. About what makes us happy." She blinked, clearly not expecting this conversation. "Henry, if this is about last night..." "It's not about last night," I said quietly. "It's about everything." We had dinner in careful, polite conversation. Stella mentioned a new project at work. I told her about a book I was reading. Neither of us mentioned Marcus or promotions or the fact that she'd come home at 3 in the morning. It was the kind of dinner we'd shared hundreds of times before, but this time I knew it was ending. Not just the dinner, but all of it. After she went to bed, I sat in my chair in the living room, staring at nothing. Tomorrow I would have to decide what to do with what I'd learned. But tonight I just sat in the quiet of our house, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage I'd thought was real. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, I realized. It was understanding that I'd been living a lie for months, maybe longer, that the woman sleeping in our bedroom had already left me in every way that mattered. I was just the last one to know. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Stella, listening to her breathe, watching the ceiling fan turn in the darkness. She slept peacefully, completely unaware that I'd discovered her secret life. At some point around 4 in the morning, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I was going to be smart about this. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was going to take control of my own life. The next morning, I waited until Stella left for work before I called in sick. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought new locks for every door in the house. Not because I wanted to keep her out permanently, but because I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. While I was installing the new deadbolt on the front door, my phone rang. It was my brother Tom calling from Portland. "Henry, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" I paused, screwdriver in hand. Tom and I had always been close, but I'd never been the type to burden him with marital problems. This felt different, though. This felt like something I couldn't handle alone. "Stella's having an affair," I said, the words coming out flat and matter-of-fact. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Jesus, Henry, are you sure?" I told him about the photos, the journal, the way she'd excluded me from her celebration. When I finished, Tom was quiet for another long moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not going to be stupid about it." "Good," Tom said firmly. "Don't do anything rash. And Henry, document everything. If this goes where I think it's going, you will need proof." After we hung up, I sat on my front porch steps, looking at the new locks I'd just installed. The house felt different already, more like mine than ours. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own space. Around noon, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I drove to Stella's office. I wasn't planning to confront her or cause a scene. I just wanted to see them together, to understand what I was really dealing with. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most people were out to lunch. I parked across the street and waited. At 12:45, Stella emerged from the building. She wasn't alone. Marcus walked beside her, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. It was a gesture so intimate, so possessive that I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't a new relationship. This was established, comfortable. They moved together like a couple who'd been together for months. They got into Marcus's silver BMW and drove away. I followed at a distance, feeling foolish but needing to know. They went to a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with dim lighting and intimate booths. Through the window, I watched them sit across from each other, leaning in close, their conversation animated and clearly romantic. Stella laughed at something Marcus said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. It was the kind of lunch date I'd been asking her to go on for years. She'd always claimed to be too busy, too stressed with work to take long lunch breaks. But here she was, taking exactly that kind of break with him. I drove home feeling hollow but determined. This wasn't just an affair. This was a complete alternate life she'd been living. And I'd been relegated to the role of unknowing roommate who paid half the bills. That afternoon I did something else I'd never done. I went through our joint bank statements. What I found made my stomach turn. Over the past 6 months there had been charges I'd never noticed before. Restaurants I'd never been to. Hotels in cities where Stella claimed to have work conferences. A jewelry store charge for $800 in April. I'd never seen any new jewelry. The most damning charge was from 2 weeks ago. A $500 dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in the city. The same night Stella had told me she was working late and would just grab a sandwich at the office. I printed out the bank statements and put them in a folder along with photos I'd taken of the contents of Stella's hidden box. Tom was right. I needed documentation. As I was organizing the papers, my phone buzzed. A text from Stella. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. There's leftover soup in the fridge." More leftovers. More lies. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Okay, love you." It wasn't true anymore, but I needed her to believe everything was normal until I figured out my next move. Around 6 o'clock, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I looked out the window and felt my blood run cold. Stella's car was in the driveway, and Marcus was getting out of the passenger seat. They weren't working late. They were coming to my house. I watched through the window as Stella fumbled with her keys, clearly having had a few drinks. Marcus stood close behind her, his hand on her waist. When she couldn't get the key to work, she giggled and tried again. The key wouldn't turn because I'd changed the locks. I sat very still, watching them through the window. Stella tried the key several more times, her giggling turning to confusion, then frustration. She pulled out her phone and started typing what I assumed was a text to me. My phone buzzed. "Key isn't working. Are you home? Can you let me in?" I didn't respond. I just watched. After a few more minutes of trying the key, Stella walked around to the side of the house where the living room window was. The curtains were open and she could see me sitting in my chair. Her face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, realization, then something that might have been fear. Marcus appeared behind her at the window. This was the first time I'd seen him up close, and I was struck by how young he looked. Young and confident and completely unprepared for the situation he'd walked into. Stella gestured frantically for me to come to the door. When I didn't move, she pressed her face against the glass and mouthed, "What's going on?" I stood up slowly and walked to the window. For a long moment we stared at each other through the glass. My wife of 15 years and the man she'd been planning to leave me for. Then I held up the folder of bank statements and photographs. The color drained from Stella's face. Marcus looked confused, glancing between us, clearly not understanding what was happening. I walked to the front door but didn't open it. Instead, I spoke loudly enough for them to hear me through the wood. "I know about the affair, Stella. I know about the hotels and the restaurants and the weekend getaways. I know about the jewelry you bought him with our money." Silence from the other side of the door. "I also know you were planning to bring him here tonight, while you thought I was waiting at home like an obedient husband, eating leftovers and staying out of the way of your real life." Marcus said something I couldn't make out. Stella shushed him sharply. "Henry!" Stella's voice came through the door, shaky but trying to sound reasonable. "Let me explain. This isn't what you think." I almost laughed. Even now, caught red-handed, she was going to try to lie her way out of it. "It's exactly what I think," I said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I heard them whispering urgently to each other on the other side of the door. After a few minutes, Stella tried again. "Henry, please. I know you're hurt, but we can work this out. Just let me in so we can talk." "No," I said simply. "I'm done talking. I'm done being the leftover in your life." I walked away from the door and back to my chair, leaving them standing on the porch of the house that was no longer theirs. Through the window, I watched Marcus gesture angrily, clearly frustrated with the situation he'd been dragged into. This wasn't how their romantic evening was supposed to go. After about 10 more minutes, they left. I sat in my chair for a long time after their car disappeared, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. For the first time since I'd discovered Stella's betrayal, I felt like I was in control of my own life. But I knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow everything would change. I spent the evening making phone calls, first to a locksmith, to have all the locks changed again. I wanted to be sure they couldn't find a way in, then to a divorce attorney my brother had recommended, finally to a local hotel where I made a reservation for Stella under her name. She'd been so concerned about my comfort, about making sure I had leftovers to eat. Tonight she could worry about her own comfort. She could figure out where she was going to sleep and what she was going to eat, and how she was going to explain to Marcus why their romantic evening had gone so spectacularly wrong. As I got ready for bed in the house that now felt truly mine for the first time in months, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even particularly sad. I was free. The next evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked a real dinner, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, a nice bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. I wasn't eating alone, though. Across from me sat Patricia Hendricks, the divorce attorney my brother had recommended. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel grey hair and kind but sharp eyes. She'd agreed to meet me at the house after hours because, as she put it, sometimes you need to see the whole picture to understand the case. "The documentation you've provided is excellent," Patricia said, reviewing the folder I'd prepared. "Bank statements, photographs, the journal entries. This will make things much simpler. We were discussing asset division when we heard a car in the driveway." Patricia looked up from her papers. "Expecting someone?" I glanced at my watch, 7:45. "Actually, yes, I think we're about to meet my wife." Through the dining room window, I could see Stella getting out of Marcus's BMW. She looked nervous, checking her reflection in the car's side mirror, smoothing her hair. Marcus appeared less confident than he had the night before. The reality of the situation was clearly settling in for both of them. "They're coming to get her things," I explained to Patricia, "and probably to try to convince me that this is all a misunderstanding." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you want? To be convinced?" I thought about it for a moment, watching Stella walk up the front path of the house we'd shared for 5 years. Did I want to be convinced? Did I want her to have some explanation that would make the photos and the journal and the months of lies disappear? "No," I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. "I want this to be over." The doorbell rang. "Would you like me to step out?" Patricia asked quietly. "No," I said again. "I want you to stay. I want her to see exactly where this is heading." I opened the door to find Stella standing on the porch, Marcus hovering behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable. Stella had clearly been crying. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red. When she saw me, she tried to smile, but it came out shaky and desperate. "Henry," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "Thank God you're here. I was so worried after last night. I tried calling, but you didn't answer." I had indeed ignored her 17 phone calls and 12 text messages. Patricia had advised me to document any contact but not to respond until we had a clear legal strategy. "I was busy," I said simply. "Can we come in, please? I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this like adults." I stepped aside and gestured them into the living room. As they passed through the dining room, both of them stopped short at the sight of Patricia sitting at our table with legal documents spread in front of her. "Henry." Stella's voice was barely a whisper. "Who is this?" "Patricia Hendricks," I said calmly. "My attorney." The color drained from Stella's face. Marcus took an involuntary step backward, clearly wanting to be anywhere else in the world. "Your attorney?" Stella repeated, as if the words didn't make sense. "Patricia, I'd like you to meet my wife, Stella, and her companion, Marcus." Patricia stood gracefully and extended her hand to Stella, who shook it automatically, still looking stunned. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Marcus mumbled something that might have been a greeting, his face bright red. The confident young man who had been feeding my wife strawberries in romantic photographs looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I don't understand," Stella said, her voice gaining strength as the shock wore off. "Henry, you can't just... We haven't even talked about this. You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" I asked. I walked to the bookshelf where I'd placed one of the photographs. From her hidden box, the one of her and Marcus sharing champagne at the bed and breakfast. I handed it to her. Tell me what conclusion I should draw from this. Stella stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Marcus looked over her shoulder and closed his eyes in defeat. That's not... She started, then stopped. There was no point in lying anymore, and we all knew it. There are 17 more photos like that one, I said quietly. Plus bank statements showing $5,300 in charges for hotels and restaurants I've never been to. Plus your journal, where you wrote about how our marriage was just settling for comfort, and how you deserve better. Patricia cleared her throat gently. Perhaps we should all sit down. We moved to the living room, though Marcus remained standing near the door as if ready to bolt. Stella perched on the edge of the couch she'd picked out 2 years ago, her hands trembling slightly. Henry, she began, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when she was trying to manage a difficult client. I know this looks bad. I know I should have told you sooner. But you have to understand, this wasn't planned. It just happened. What just happened? I asked. The affair? Or getting caught? She flinched. Don't call it that. What should I call it? A working relationship? A team-building exercise? Marcus finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. Look, Mr. Holloway, I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just friendship, and then you started sleeping with my wife. I finished for him. Henry, Stella snapped, some of her old authority returning. You don't have to be cruel. I looked at her sitting there, still beautiful, still trying to control the narrative even as her world collapsed around her. For 15 years I'd loved this woman. I'd built a life with her, planned a future, and she'd thrown it away for a 28-year-old who looked ready to run, screaming from the room. You want to talk about cruel? I asked. Let me tell you what's cruel. Cruel is excluding your husband from celebrating your promotion so you can be with your boyfriend. Cruel is sending me texts about leftovers while you're planning romantic getaways. Cruel is spending our money on jewelry for another man. Cruel is writing in your journal about how disappointed you are in the life we built together. With each word, Stella seemed to shrink a little more. By the time I finished, she was crying again. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. But you did, I said simply. Every day for months you hurt me. You made me feel like I was in the way of my own life. Patricia, who had been sitting quietly through this exchange, finally spoke. Mrs. Holloway, I think it would be best if we discussed the practical matters. Mr. Holloway has asked me to file for divorce on grounds of adultery. Stella's head snapped up. Divorce? Henry, you can't be serious. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out together. I felt something break loose in my chest, like a knot I'd been carrying for months finally coming undone. No, Stella. We can't work this out. Because you already made your choice. You chose Marcus. You chose secret dinners and romantic weekends and a completely separate life that didn't include me. The only reason you want to work it out now is because you got caught. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. I turned to Marcus, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper. What about you, Marcus? Are you planning to stick around to help her work this out? Or are you going to disappear the moment things get complicated? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. That's what I thought, I said. Patricia gathered her papers efficiently. Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, I'll have the divorce papers ready for filing by Monday morning. Mrs. Holloway, you'll want to retain your own counsel. Stella stood abruptly. This is happening too fast. Henry, please, just give me some time to think, to figure out what I want. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had shared my bed and my life and my dreams for 15 years. You had time to think, Stella. You had months to think. You thought about Marcus and romantic weekends and expensive dinners and how disappointing your marriage was. The one thing you didn't think about was telling me the truth. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, and for the first time she sounded truly lost. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a hotel keycard. I made you a reservation at the Hampton Inn downtown. 3 nights, prepaid. She stared at the keycard as if it were a snake. You want me to leave? I want you to face the consequences of your choices, I said. For months you've been living 2 lives. Now you get to choose which one you really want. Marcus stepped forward awkwardly. Stella, maybe we should go. We can figure this out somewhere else. Yes, I agreed. You should go figure it out somewhere else. Patricia handed Stella a business card. You'll want to call this number. She's an excellent family attorney. As they walked toward the door, Stella turned back one more time. Henry, I want you to know that I did love you. I do love you. I nodded. I believe you did, but love wasn't enough to keep you from lying to me every day for 6 months. After they left, I sat back down at the dining room table with Patricia. The salmon had gone cold, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. How do you feel? Patricia asked gently. I considered the question. How did I feel? Sad, certainly. Angry a little, but more than anything I felt relieved. Free, I said finally. For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Patricia smiled. Good. That's how you should feel. As I cleaned up the dinner dishes later that night, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I'd been alone for months without knowing it, eating leftovers while Stella lived her real life elsewhere. Now finally I could start living my real life too. The divorce papers were filed on Monday morning, just as Patricia had promised. By Tuesday afternoon, Stella was calling me every hour. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemails. They started angry, then became pleading, then desperate. Henry, you're being ridiculous. We can fix this. Please just talk to me. I know I made mistakes, but this doesn't have to end our marriage. I left Marcus. I told him it was over. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant she was panicking. It meant the reality of losing everything was finally sinking in. But it didn't change what she'd done or who she'd become in the process. On Wednesday, she showed up at my office. I worked for a mid-sized accounting firm downtown, the same place I'd been for 12 years. It was steady, reliable work. The kind of job Stella used to call safe, in a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. My secretary, Mrs. Chen, buzzed my desk at 2:30. Henry, your wife is here. She says it's urgent. I could see Stella through the glass wall of my office, pacing in the reception area. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, her usually perfect hair limp, her clothes wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. Send her in, I said. Stella rushed into my office and closed the door behind her. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. I know, I said, not looking up from my computer screen. I've been getting your messages. Then why won't you call me back? Henry, we need to talk about this like rational adults. I finally looked at her. The woman standing in my office bore little resemblance to the confident, radiant person who had walked out of our house to celebrate her promotion with Marcus. This Stella looked broken, desperate. What's there to talk about? I asked calmly. Everything, she exploded. Our marriage, our future, what we're going to do about this mess. There is no mess, Stella. There's just the end of our marriage. She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. You can't mean that. 15 years, Henry. Doesn't that count for anything? It did, I said simply. Right up until you decided it didn't. I never said it didn't matter. I made a mistake, okay? I got caught up in something that felt exciting and new, and I lost sight of what was important. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. When did it start? What? The affair. When did it start? She looked down at her hands. It wasn't an affair at first. We were just friends. When, Stella? October, she whispered. October. 7 months ago. I thought about all the nights she'd worked late, all the weekend conferences, all the times. I'd asked if everything was okay, and she'd assured me it was. So, for 7 months, you've been lying to me every single day. It wasn't like that. In the beginning, it really was just friendship. The romantic part didn't start until January. January. 4 months of active betrayal, of coming home to me after being with him, of planning a future that didn't include me while pretending everything was normal. I know about the hotel in Asheville, I said quietly. She went very still. What? The bed and breakfast, Valentine's Day weekend. You told me you were visiting your sister in Charlotte. Stella's face crumpled. How do you know about that? I know about all of it. The dinner at Romano's in March when you said you were working late. The weekend conference in Atlanta that was actually a couple's retreat. The jewelry you bought him with our joint account. How long have you known? She whispered. About the affair? 3 weeks, about you being unhappy in our marriage. Probably longer than you realize. She stared at me in shock. 3 weeks? You've known for 3 weeks and you didn't say anything? What was I supposed to say? Honey, I found your secret love letters. Please stop cheating on me. You could have given me a chance to explain. I almost laughed. Explain what? That you were planning to leave me anyway? That our marriage was just something comfortable to settle for while you figured out what you really wanted? She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. We both knew what her journal had said. The promotion celebration, I continued. That wasn't about excluding me from work talk. That was about celebrating your new life with Marcus without having to pretend around me. Stella was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and the only reason you want to stop now is because you got caught. My phone rang. Mrs. Chen's voice came through the speaker. Henry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a gentleman here to see Mrs. Holloway. He says it's urgent. Through the glass wall I could see Marcus standing in the reception area. He looked as bad as Stella. Unshaven, his usually crisp shirt rumpled. Send him in, I said. Stella turned to see Marcus approaching and her face went white. Oh God, Marcus, what are you doing here? Marcus entered my office looking like a man walking to his execution. Stella, we need to talk. Something's happened. What now? I asked, genuinely curious. Marcus glanced at me nervously, then back at Stella. My wife found out. Your wife? I said, raising an eyebrow. You're married? The room went dead silent. Stella was staring at Marcus with an expression of complete shock. You're married, she repeated, her voice barely audible. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. Yes, we've been separated for 6 months, but we're still legally married. Sarah found out about us and she's threatening to tell Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson was the CEO of Stella's company. The same CEO who had a very public policy about maintaining professional standards and avoiding conflicts of interest. She has photos, Marcus continued miserably, of us at the restaurant at the hotel in Asheville. She hired a private investigator. I watched this revelation hit Stella like a physical blow. Not only had Marcus been lying to her about his marriage, but now their affair was about to become public knowledge at her workplace. This can't be happening, Stella whispered. It gets worse, Marcus said. Sarah's divorce attorney contacted HR today. They're launching an investigation into our relationship to determine if it violates company policy. I had to admit I felt a certain dark satisfaction watching this unfold. Stella had been so careful to keep me in the dark while she lived her double life. Now she was discovering that Marcus had been living a triple life. How long have you been married? I asked Marcus, genuinely curious. 4 years, he admitted. And you've been separated for 6 months, which means you were still living with your wife when you started the affair with mine. Marcus nodded miserably. I turned to Stella. Did you know any of this? She shook her head, still in shock. He told me he was single. He said he'd never been married. So he lied to you the way you'd lied to me. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Stella, I think we should lay low for a while. Maybe take a break until this all dies down. A break? Stella's voice was getting higher. Marcus, I left my husband for you. I destroyed my marriage for you. I know and I'm sorry, but with the investigation and Sarah threatening to expose everything, you're abandoning me, Stella said flatly. Marcus didn't deny it. I stood up from my desk. I think you two need to have this conversation somewhere else. Henry, please. Stella turned to me desperately. I know I messed up, but you can't just throw away 15 years. I'm not throwing anything away, I said calmly. You already did that. After they left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing what I'd just witnessed. Stella had blown up her marriage for a man who was already married and who was now abandoning her the moment things got complicated. I should have felt sorry for her. Part of me did, but mostly I felt vindicated. This was who she'd chosen over me. A liar who had been using her just as much as she'd been using me. That evening I called my brother Tom. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted. Stella's boyfriend turned out to be married. His wife is exposing the affair to their company. The whole thing is falling apart. Jesus, do you feel bad for her? I thought about it. I feel bad for the Stella I married 15 years ago. But that woman's been gone for months. The person who took her place? No, I don't feel bad for her. Good, Tom said firmly. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. The next morning, Patricia called with an update. Stella's attorney wants to discuss a settlement. Apparently, she's facing some professional difficulties that are making her eager to resolve things quickly. What kind of settlement? She's willing to give up her claim to the house and take minimal alimony in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. I thought about Stella's desperation in my office, the way she'd looked when Marcus told her about the investigation. She wasn't trying to save our marriage anymore. She was trying to save face. What do you recommend? I asked. Take it, Patricia said without hesitation. She's in no position to negotiate. As I hung up the phone, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had sustained me through the discovery and the confrontation had burned out, leaving behind something cleaner. Resolution. Stella had chosen her path when she started the affair. Now she was learning that actions have consequences, that the exciting new life she'd thought she wanted came with a price she hadn't anticipated. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back porch with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink. The house felt different now, lighter, more peaceful. I'd redecorated after the divorce was finalized. Not because I was trying to erase memories, but because I wanted the space to reflect who I was becoming rather than who I'd been. The settlement had gone through exactly as Patricia predicted. Stella kept her car and her personal belongings. I kept the house and most of our savings. She'd been so eager to finalize everything quickly that she'd barely negotiated. Looking back, I understood why. The investigation at her company had been thorough and devastating. Not only had she been demoted from her new position, but she'd been transferred to a different department entirely. Marcus had been let go completely. Their affair had violated several company policies, and the CEO had made an example of them. I learned all this not from Stella, but from my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter worked in HR at Stella's company. Small town, small world. I heard she moved to Portland. Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned casually while we were both checking our mail. Took a job with a smaller firm, probably best for everyone. I'd nodded politely, but inside I felt only a distant kind of sadness. Not for the end of our marriage, but for the waste of it all. 15 years that should have meant something, reduced to a cautionary tale about making bad choices. My phone rang, interrupting my morning meditation. Tom's name appeared on the screen. "How's retirement treating you, old man?" he asked cheerfully. I'd taken early retirement 3 months ago, using the settlement money to pay off the house and give myself time to figure out what came next. At 58, I was young enough to start over, and for the first time in my adult life, I had the freedom to do exactly what I wanted. "It's good," I said, and meant it. "I'm thinking about taking that photography class we talked about. The one at the community college." "That's great, Henry. Mom would be proud." Our mother had been a photographer before she got married and had kids. She tried to teach both Tom and me when we were young, but I'd been too focused on practical things like accounting to pay much attention. Now, with time on my hands and no one else's agenda to consider, I was rediscovering interests I'd forgotten I had. "Speaking of which," Tom continued, "Jennifer wants to know if you're coming for Thanksgiving. She's been planning the menu for weeks." Tom's wife, Jennifer, had been more supportive through the divorce than my own sister had been. She'd called regularly, invited me to dinner, made sure I wasn't spending too many evenings alone. Good people. Solid marriage. The kind of partnership I'd thought I had with Stella. "I'll be there," I promised. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, and maybe one of those apple pies you've been perfecting." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. The apple pies had been an unexpected development. With time on my hands and a kitchen that was finally mine alone, I'd started experimenting with baking. It turned out I had a talent for it. Who knew? Around 10 o'clock, I drove into town to run some errands. The grocery store, the bank, the post office. Simple tasks that had once felt like chores now felt like choices. I could take my time, chat with the cashiers, stop for coffee if I felt like it. At the coffee shop, I ran into Margaret Sullivan, who had taught English at the high school for 30 years before retiring. We'd known each other casually for years, but had started having regular conversations since I'd become a regular customer. "Henry," she smiled warmly as I approached her table. "How's the photography coming along?" I'd shown her some of my early attempts the week before. Landscapes mostly, pictures of the sunrise from my back porch, the way light filtered through the trees in the park. "Getting better," I said, sitting down across from her. "I signed up for that intermediate class that starts next month." "That's wonderful. You have a real eye for it." Margaret was 62, widowed 5 years ago, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver hair she wore in a simple bob. She was intelligent, kind, and, most importantly, completely honest about who she was. No hidden agendas, no secret lives. We'd been having coffee together once a week for 2 months now, and I was beginning to realize that these conversations were the highlight of my week. Not because I was looking for romance, I wasn't sure I was ready for that yet, but because it felt good to talk to someone who listened without judgment and shared her thoughts without calculation. "I heard they're starting a photography club at the senior center," Margaret mentioned casually. "Would you be interested in something like that?" "Maybe," I said. "Would you be interested in something like that?" She laughed. "I might be. I've always wanted to learn." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning crowd come and go. It struck me how different this was from conversations with Stella. No underlying tension, no sense that I was missing something important, no feeling that I needed to be anyone other than exactly who I was. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said finally. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? The divorce, I mean. Ending such a long marriage?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. Everyone else seemed to assume I must have regrets, must miss the partnership and companionship of marriage. Even Tom had asked me directly if I was lonely. "No," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "I regret that it ended the way it did. I regret that Stella felt she had to lie instead of just telling me she was unhappy. But I don't regret ending it." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "My marriage wasn't perfect, but Robert and I always talked through our problems. I can't imagine trying to build a life with someone who was living a completely different life behind my back." "That's exactly what it felt like," I said. "Like I was married to someone who didn't actually exist." We talked for another hour about books and photography and the changing seasons. When I finally walked home, I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced in years. That afternoon, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called Stella. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Henry, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." A long pause. "I'm okay, getting settled in Portland. The job is fine, nothing exciting, but it pays the bills." "Good. I'm glad you landed on your feet." Another pause. "How are you doing? Really?" I looked around my living room at the new furniture I'd chosen, the photographs I'd framed and hung on the walls, the stack of library books on the coffee table. "I'm good, Stella, really good." "I heard you retired." "I did. I'm taking photography classes, learning to bake, thinking about traveling." "That sounds—" She trailed off, then started again. "Henry, I want you to know how sorry I am. About everything. About the way I handled things, the lies, all of it." I could hear genuine regret in her voice, and for the first time since I'd discovered her affair, I felt something like forgiveness stirring in my chest. "I know you are," I said gently. "We both made mistakes, Stella. We stopped talking to each other, stopped paying attention to what the other person needed. But I'm the one who cheated. I'm the one who destroyed everything. You made choices that ended our marriage," I agreed. "But I chose to ignore the signs that you were unhappy. We both share responsibility for what our marriage became." She was crying now. I could tell from her voice. "I miss you sometimes. Not the affair, not the drama, just you. The way you used to make me laugh. The way you always knew how to fix things." I felt my throat tighten. "I miss parts of us too, but we can't go back, Stella. We can only move forward. I know, I hope you find someone who deserves you." After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, processing the conversation. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. Not forgiveness exactly, and certainly not reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that we'd both been human beings trying to figure out how to be happy and making imperfect choices along the way. As the sun set behind the trees in my backyard, I thought about the future for the first time without anxiety or anger. Tomorrow I would go to my photography class. This weekend I would visit Tom and Jennifer. Next month I might ask Margaret if she'd like to have dinner instead of just coffee. For 58 years I'd lived my life according to other people's expectations and schedules. I'd been a good son, a reliable employee, a faithful husband. Now finally I had the chance to figure out who I was when no one else's needs were driving my decisions. The house around me was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness. It was the peaceful quiet of contentment. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do, with exactly the people I chose to spend time with. Stella had wanted me to remember the leftovers in the refrigerator. Instead, I'd learned to cook fresh meals for myself every day. She'd excluded me from her celebration. Instead, I'd learned to celebrate small victories. A good photograph, a successful pie, a meaningful conversation with a friend. I wasn't the leftover in anyone's life anymore. I was the main course in my own, and for the first time in months when I went to bed that night, I fell asleep not thinking about what I'd lost, but about what I was going to discover next.